Good morning, everybody. It's so lovely to see you today. Welcome to our discussion around shared services. My name is Cara Evans. I'm Head of Partnerships and Mergers at Eastside People. For those of you who don't know, Eastside People is a charity consultancy who's been around in various different guises for 2 decades, and we support organisations in lots of different ways: recruitment, strategy, social investment, AI, anything that you might need. And obviously the bit that I head up is around partnerships and mergers. So this was a session particularly about shared services, because I think it's something in the sector that we definitely want to consider. And we've got some amazing speakers here today. As you can see, Valerie Boggs, from CEO of TaxAid and Tax Help for older people. I knew I was going to not manage that. Sorry, Valerie. And then Stephen Elson, who's one of our Eastside People consultants, but he's also done lots and lots of work around shared services, and Andrew Bryant from Casework Services. So I'm going to speak very briefly, and I'm going to cover a few slides, and then I'm going to carry on to our speakers, and then we will have plenty of time for questions and answers. So that's great. One of the things I needed to let you know is we are recording today, because we've got lots of people who are very interested in this discussion. So just to let you know, it is being recorded. So I think I will crack on with my slides. Marina, if you can then move on to the next slide, that would be great. So obviously there's lots of different types of partnerships. And Marina, if you go to the next slide, that'd be amazing. Great. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about was the collaboration spectrum. So I think this is something that you will all be very familiar with, and I think it's, for some people, one end of the spectrum around an informal partnership is great, and then at the other end of the spectrum, which is around mergers, may be what your organisation needs. One of the reasons I include this slide is to remind people of the different types of options of partnerships. And yes, you definitely will receive the size later, so don't worry. There's different types of partnerships, and it's always good to know that you've got options. So when I always think about a partnership, I think about what is it that you want to achieve, what's the ultimate outcome, and then what is the kind of model that you need to achieve that. So I've included that in here to remind you of that, but the main reason I included it is to sort of identify what we're talking about this morning, which is shared services, which is back office shared services, but also fundraising, also service delivery. There's all different types, and it's important to know that how they work, in what way they work, and what the things that you need to consider, which is what I'm going to cover this morning. So if we can go to the next slide, please, Maureen, that'd be great. Thank you very much. So I did do some research to find out what was out there. For some inexplicable reason, they all began with S, and I've no idea why that is. And there's some more information at the back end of these slides about these partnerships. Again, you're probably going to know something similar, and our wonderful speakers are going to talk through their examples. I think what's really helpful is to understand what's currently happening. Sense is quite an interesting one in terms of their shared office space, but they also provide financial services as well. Shelter's done the same thing, and myself as a COO of the Mix, we did a shared office space, and it was amazing. It worked really, really well. And there's some other examples of consortium and service delivery. So that's just to give you a sort of taster of what's there, but we'll go into some more specific examples with our speaker in a minute. So if we can, thank you so much. One of the things that came through in your questions was around the benefits and reasons for shared services. And again, I think some of this you already know, but I do think it's worth pulling out. One of the key things that I think everybody would want to see is cost savings. And I definitely think you will see it. You just might not see it straight away. So I think it's important to do the maths beforehand to work out what that actually looked like and when you would expect to see those savings. Again, you will see some efficiency gains. That's definitely lack of duplication, and you can see how that works much more effectively. Depending on the type of shared services, the access to expertise that you might not have in your organisation is absolutely worth its weight in gold, particularly for smaller charities. And that knowledge sharing is really important because, again, it's access to something that you might not have around innovation or ideas. It does give you the option of scalability because you can start small and build up. So that's really, really helpful, and you don't have to have a massive investment right in the outset. And ultimately, it will give you some resilience in terms of weathering some of those financial pressures. Again, I don't think there's anything in here that you don't know, but I think it's helpful to have that laid out. And obviously, you can refer back to it when you send the presentation to you. Obviously, there are challenges. If we can move to the next slide. Yes, we're definitely sending out the slides, don't worry. So for a lot of people, there's a loss of autonomy. So it does mean you don't have quite as much control as you have before, and sometimes the decision making is a bit difficult. But that is something that can definitely be managed. Yes, you will have a link to recording as well. You need to consider the governance, because obviously if you're managing shared services, the governance structure or the management might be slightly different, so that can make it a bit more complex and may take a little bit more effort, particularly on the setup. One of the key elements is the value alignment. So if there is a cultural misalignment, that is going to be a challenge, and that is going to be much harder. So again, that's mitigated by making sure that any partnerships you invest in, you have similar cultural values and working styles. I can't reiterate that enough. You will have some initial setup costs. That is ultimately going to happen. But again, if you do the maths up front, you can work out how quickly you'll be able to get the cost savings. There is a risk of service disruption as you change those services, and you need to plan and prepare for that, but it's knowing that that may happen. One of the key things is making sure that you have got your data sorted, ensuring that you are following data protection and that all those procedures and policies are followed. And for some people, you might feel that there's some slight unequal benefits if a larger charity is dominating. But again, that comes to how you manage the partnership. And that is my next slide, which again is really about thinking about the key elements of the partnership. Again, I don't think there's anything on this slide that you don't already know, but it's helpful to lay it out. You will know that for any kind of shared services, you need to have an aligned vision. That purpose and those ultimate outcomes are essential to agree what you want to achieve. Building trust is really, really important, because that's how all partnerships work well, and really being very transparent about who's doing what and how reliable that partnership is. Regular and frequent communication is obviously completely essential in order to manage any issues that are coming up. And if you need to do any financial or legal due diligence to make sure there's no skeletons in the cupboard as you start this partnership, that really, really helps too. But clarity on that resource sharing, who is doing what, how is it going to work, what are you getting out of it, how do you make sure this is going to work? And last but no means least is that monitoring. Is this achieving the objectives that you want to achieve? Do you need to change anything? Is it working for how you want to work? Again, nothing there that you wouldn't expect to see, but again, helpful to have it laid out. So I think that's enough for me in terms of setting the context. I'm going to pass. Oh, no, it isn't. There's one more. It's helpful if I can remember my slides. This will be helpful for you when they come to you. We produced something called the Collaboration Canvas in partnership with an organisation called Figurative, funded by the Arts Council earlier this year, called the Collaboration Canvas. It's specifically for the arts and culture sector, but it goes into that collaboration spectrum in quite a lot of detail in terms of the pros and cons of each of those different models and things to consider. You can download that for free from the Figurative website, and when you get this presentation, that link will take you straight through. NCVO, as you would expect, have some amazing information about collaboration. I would suggest you have a read of that. We have recently updated our Good Merger Guide that we produced a decade ago, but we have updated it into something called the Charity Merger Guide, which is now a series of 7 articles on our website. Again, you can click through to go to those, which takes you through every step of the merger journey. Obviously, that's at one end of the spectrum. We're not covering that today, but just so you know that that's there. And last but not least, I found this wonderful website where 65 organisations have shared their digital tools. So if you need anything digital, I would have a look at that. It's really, really helpful. But again, that links you straight through, so you can definitely have some useful information. Now I think it's definitely the right time, yay, to go to our speakers. So I'm going to pass to Valerie first, then Stephen, and then Andrew, and they're going to share their experiences of shared services, what they've learnt, and the things for you to consider. And when they're finished, I will then be able to tell you how to do questions and answers at the next bit. So thank you very much, Valerie.
Thank you, Cara, and great to be here this morning. There's quite a lot to cover in a very short period of time. And maybe because I'm thinking, you always think your own situation is unique. And so I hope what I have to share is really useful and practical. Just for a little bit of context setting, as Cara said in her introduction, introduced me as CEO of both TaxAid and Tax Help for older people. Our current situation is that we have legally merged, which we did in July, but until November, we're working through rebranding, defining exactly how we're going to present ourselves as one merged organisation under one trading name. So at the moment, we still have the two trading names of the two charities that merged in July. And I think sitting back from it, considering just what are the push and pull factors when it came to the decision to merge, this goes actually quite far back. Probably, if I'm really honest about it, it probably goes back more 8 or 9 years. And I think one of the challenges for, as I see it in the charity sector, is that tension between being driven to provide the service that your beneficiaries need and the objectives of your charity, alongside getting the business model right, working at its most efficient and effective, and using the appropriate way of organizing your business to do that. And it's kind of, to me, it's a balance and a juggle. And often what I have found in my experience is that staff are very much driven by the want to deliver the service. And that bit about, well, actually, we do have to have enough money to do this, and we do have to do it in a responsible way and under the appropriate legislation or governance models. That's a bit that's much harder to get staff to buy into. They just want to get on with the job. The two charities that I'm the CEO of, that is now one, it'd be so good to get this as one name. It'll be a lot easier to introduce myself. Essentially, what we do is we deliver a helpline, primarily a helpline, to people who need support with tax. Now, you'd think that the two charities are really delivering the same service. Therefore, surely it would be really easy to bring those two together. The challenge is that when those two charities started, they decided to do this in completely different ways. And they did that, one, by using tax experts. That comes with a price tag when you're going to pay somebody who's got the tax expertise. The other decided to recruit people with no tax expertise at all, and to provide the training. So actually, you had two teams, entirely different cultures, and almost, you could say, an animosity between those two very different ways of delivering a service, because people had built up the value of the service. They had both teams had a great aligned to the purpose of the charities, which at the end of the day for the beneficiaries was helping provide the same service, just to a different audience. So one to people who are older, one to people who are younger. So on the face of it, it looks like they're doing the same thing. The underlying way of organizing that business was entirely different. So it seems obvious, and I think going through those slides is helpful. I've looked at that sort of scenario of how do you do this, what model do you use, for a long time, and on paper it looks easy because you just follow it through. You just follow through the process. You get your legal team on board. You get the trustees on board, you set up your subcommittee, you can get the spreadsheets out, you can make the thing work on a piece of paper. The challenge, as I see it, is bringing the people with you and actually working with the teams to get them to really buy into it. Because all we wanted to do, we had the two business models had sort of strengths and weaknesses. We had a sort of a skills gap at one. We were too expensive on the other. On a piece of paper, it made sense to share the expertise where there was a gap at one. It made sense to share those who didn't have that level of expertise but had a lot of empathy on a helpline. it was so easy on paper. Now, we tried to do this in 2020 because we needed at that stage, for all the obvious reasons, to cut our costs, and we had financial challenges. So we said, we've got to make this work. The point around will you have cost savings? I would say, we're still doing the spreadsheet saying, where are the cost savings to some extent? Because we were trying to achieve a couple of things. Yes, we were trying to bring the costs down at one. And we were trying to also be more competitive in raising money from trusts and foundations because we looked expensive in delivering the service. So we were trying to do that thing where you're saying, how do we present ourselves to the world, to our funders? We have to find a way to do this more efficiently and effectively. So we were trying to meet that need. So we were trying to do this through COVID, essentially, and on a piece of paper, we entered into a collaboration agreement. We were able to bring our staff along with that, but we've eventually got to the stage where we're able to say, okay, we've been doing this long enough, and actually to merge was, well, we'll just sort the governance now, because the governance now just has to follow what we have evolved through our working collaboratively. So because we entered the collaboration agreement in 2020, I would say that really set us up for the point at which we're now merged. So it for us, it has been a good way to, you could say test it out, because we could therefore, we didn't have to merge. But it having been successful, we have made that decision, and it's terrific because the trustees were very much aligned. It wasn't a difficult decision to merge. It was more, how do we do this and how do we make sure we don't lose funders in doing it? But the hearts and minds bit we had achieved through the working collaboratively for the last 5 years. Though that is at the same time is a disadvantage, because one of the points on the slide around getting the governance right, but there is the temptation to spend, and I feel as CEO, when I got this job in 2019, I wanted to make a difference to our beneficiaries. I wanted to be able to provide more support to more people. Our core purpose was delivering more help to our beneficiaries. And I feel as though we have spent 5 years trying to sort out the back office. And that bit makes me feel uncomfortable. It would be better had we been able to do this more quickly. I don't really know how we might have done that, but I feel as though that is one of the obstacles we need to be careful to avoid from my perspective. But I'll leave it there. I think I'm at my 7 minutes, Cara. I've been timing myself so we don't go over. Let everybody come in and be able also to ask the questions. So, yeah.
Thank you so much, Valerie. We'll pass to Stephen.
Great. Well, morning, everybody. It's lovely to join you today. My name is Stephen Elson. I work now as a freelance charity consultant, including doing consultancy through Eastside People. But up to March last year, I was CEO of a Kent-based service delivery charity, and I was CEO there for 15 years. So some of what I'm going to talk about is what that charity did while I was there, but I've also got a little example of what's happening now in Kent. So when I joined that organisation, it had two core frontline services, digital skills training for disabled people and transport for disabled and older people, accessible transport. And when I joined back in 2009, it had a payroll function. So it was running the payroll for the staff in the organisation. And I had also already identified that with experts in payroll, it could run payroll for other charities, and also in that time for disabled people themselves who were employing personal assistants. So there was quite a, it wasn't making a massive difference to the bottom line, but it was providing some trickle income to the organisation and using existing staff's expertise and some of the payroll systems that the charity had invested in. So when I got into the organisation, I said, well, how many actually more charity payrolls could we run? What capacity have we got? And the team said, well, we've got a licence, we can put another 9 charities on there. So I said, well, okay, that's our target. We didn't quite get there, but we knew that we had that capacity in terms of the licensing. And by involving the finance staff in that, they bought into the idea that that was helping to essentially pay for their salaries. So, there was not much pushback in terms of them actually, grabbing that opportunity and running with it. 2 years into me going into the organisation, we moved into new offices, and we had a lot more space than we needed initially. So we did approach and successfully got one charity to rent an office for a year while it was setting up. And we had a big meeting room, which we also let out as a training room. So people needed first aid training facilities, we could offer that training space. So again, that was bringing in some trickle income against an increased rent bill that we had when the charity moved to new premises. So that's, if you like, the easy end of shared services. But when I was in that organisation, I was approached after about 8 years by a number of the local Age UK's branches of separate charities in Kent, who wanted to form a special purpose vehicle so they could bid for local authority contracts, but they wanted one or two members in the special purpose vehicle who weren't Age UK's, and they saw my organisation as a trusted, facilitator, if you like. So my board said, "Okay, Stephen, can you go on there that SPV as the representative trustee?" So that organisation was founded. It was called Age Well West Kent, and through that we tendered. Unsuccessful as it was for some local authority contracts, but by meeting and getting to know and trusted by the Age UKs around the table, a number of those Age UKs said to me privately, "Well, we're struggling with transporting people to our day centres because we've got very, very old staff that want to retire. We've got vehicles which are ready for the scrap heap, and we can see that you've got a very successful community transport arm. Is there any way you could provide the transport for us? Because we really want to focus on supporting the older people when they come to our centres." So with first one of those Age UKs, I put together a package of support, a charge package of support. And on the back of that, then got two other Age UKs to say, "Okay, can we have a bit of that model?" But that did need us to get very, very deep into sort of a service level agreement. So there was an expectation that if a vehicle failed while we were under contract to them, we would be responsible for putting another vehicle out to take people to or from the centre. We were responsible for keeping up with the transport legislation, but of course we were doing that anyway as our own organisation. But what I also put into that agreement, and I think this is an important thing to think about, if you're negotiating pricing, I put in an annual price review, and I linked that to against RPI. So to make sure it was a fully costed offer at the start, but I thought, well, I don't want to be locked into a price for the next 5 years. So we had an RPI lever at the end of each year, so I could go back to the charities and say, "Okay, RPI has been 4%, so we're applying a 4% increase here." Because as costs went up, particularly staff costs with real living wage increases, we would have been losing money over time if we carried on doing that. So that worked very successfully in the time that I stayed at the organisation. But another output of those Age UKs working through that SPV is that now 3 of those Age UKs have formally merged. So they're no longer separate Age UKs. There's now a much bigger Age UK operating in West Kent of what were 3 individual partners around the table. So that's the sort of experience when I was a charity CEO. But more recently, as a freelance consultant, I've been working with 2 groups of charities, one in West Kent and one in Mid Kent, to look at what those charities can do much stronger in partnership. And some of the things that they're talking about and developing, which I think are quite interesting, is saying, okay, if they need specialist training, so there might be, say, mental health training that they need to put their staff into, as a group of charities, they can purchase training and offer it out across all of their charities at a lower cost than each of them going to buy that training, individually. Another issue that we're tussling with at the moment is volunteers and staff within the sector. So those charities are looking at how they can support each other to find or move volunteers around. So if somebody volunteers for an organisation and after a while thinks, "I want to do something else," well, is there a partner organisation where that volunteer could provide, get different experiences and different, and develop different skills, but also for staff. So if a staff member is moving up through one organisation and feels, okay, there's no opportunity for growth, then actually is it better for a group of charities to say, well, there might be some other opportunities in this organisation, rather than somebody maybe leaving the sector altogether. So that's something that we're exploring at the moment. And the last thing I will leave with you as an example before we move to Andrew is there's an organisation in Medway called the Community Services Alliance, which has been running for about 4 years with some lottery funding to try and bring together a shared service special purpose vehicle in its own right. So this is a company set up so that charities can say, for example, we've got capacity in our finance team, 20% of management accounting for the time, for example, we'll put 20% into that shared purpose vehicle. Other charities can say, well, we need some management accounting support, so they can buy it from that shared vehicle and then pay at cost the charity that's providing that resource. So this is an initiative that's running at the moment in Medway, and I've been working with the engineers of that in Medway to try and get some heft behind it, so getting more Kent-based charities to buy into that model. But one of the things that I've found is it's very, very difficult for a lot of charities to understand what shared services means. And I've certainly found it most effective when I've been able to run webinars like this or in-person meetings to illustrate by people who've bought into the model and people who've put their services into the model to explain what it means for them. So I think otherwise it's so theoretical that lots of organisations struggle to really get their head around it. So that's probably the point I would leave you with at the moment.
Thank you, Stephen. That's great. I'm not sure if the lady who just messaged, we are recording it, so you'll get to see the rest of the webinar, don't worry, so don't miss out. And I'm just going to pass to Andrew now.
Hi, good morning, everybody. Yeah, my name is Andrew Bryant, so I'm the FD of the company called Casework Services. I'm going to give you a brief history of what way Casework is set up, because it will quite naturally, if I showed a progression of Casework, show you lots of the positives and also the negatives that we've had to overcome to go through the journey. So Casework was originally set up through a group of 5 Yorkshire-based Age UKs who all the CEOs were quite close through the natural networking. So there was no official agreement. If we looked at Cara's slide, it's very much on the left-hand side of that slide. It was all informal, but they did get together to try and share some kind of knowledge and difficulties and any contracts they could potentially work on across the network. But over time, it became very clear to them that they were all struggling through some respect when it came to their finance services. Now, it won't be a shock to probably many of you that, especially with smaller charities, especially, $500,000, 1 million, up to maybe 2 or 3 million, justifying the cost of having a finance accountant and then a management accountant and an FD type level became pretty impossible for them to do. And then recruiting for those roles also became very, very difficult. So what they wanted to do, and I'm going to emphasize this very strongly, is they were after resilience more than anything else. Now, yes, they obviously wanted to make efficiencies, and yes, they wanted to make cost savings. And those things do come, and as everyone else has said already, they do normally come later down the line. But initially, what they really wanted to become was make sure they became really resilient. So what they did is they set up Casework initially to take those 5 Age UKs who were all geographically quite close at the time, and they wanted to create a shared service centre for finance and payroll that would allow them to basically have a centre that was, full of people who really knew what they were doing, who had the expertise for charities and knew how to do all the charity accounting. It didn't massively matter at the time that some of those Age UKs were quite different in what activities they were doing. And I just want to emphasize that point, that actually a really good shared service centre when it comes to finance doesn't have to be clients all from the same network. And I'll move on to how Casework has evolved over time. But some of the negatives they had, because they didn't have the expertise initially to set it up and some of the difficulties they came across, they got some poor advice very early on, and this is where I need to be very careful. If you're interested in ever setting up your own shared service centres, take your time and make sure you get very good advice up front. So they were kind of pressured a little bit from the network. So the way Age UK is set up is there is a national charity who aren't directly involved necessarily, but they do offer quite a lot of advice if they want it. And they were kind of pushed down a route of getting a finance system that wasn't suitable at all for the level of the charities were at. So they were pushed down the route of having Business Central, which is a Microsoft product, and it wasn't suitable at all to those finance colleagues that they had there. And then over time, that made some of the reporting quite difficult, and they were quite strict and said, okay, we'll only take on clients if we do literally everything for them. So literally doing the transactional bits, the management accounts, the FD work. So it kind of worked for those initial five clients. But what we realized is we wanted to expand those casework and offer finance services, not just across the network, but to other charities outside the network, is we had to learn to be far more flexible in the shared service centre and what we would offer to people. That meant when I came in about 2 years ago now, I had a look at the systems they use and what different processes people needed. And I really took the time to say, actually, this finance system is not suitable. It's not scalable. It's not usable for charities, the end users for their reporting. And the reporting is a vital bit of this to make sure you're actually able to get a really flexible reporting system, because actually that's what allows us as casework to have multiple different clients across multiple different industries now, that we can still provide their custom reports they need, but I've still got my same core team doing the work and doing the transactions and the bank reconciliations and all that kind of work. But when it comes to the management accountants and the FD level, it allows us to have a really, really easy reporting system that allows me to tailor it to any of my end clients. So that was a really important change. And then also realizing what different charities need and being a bit more flexible, because you might find yourself looking, actually, if I'm interested in shared service centre, saying I've got a brilliant FD already, I don't need to go recruit that level. But it doesn't mean you don't need to have someone at a lower level doing the transactions, or it might be the complete inverse of that. You might have a brilliant person who can do all the transactional work you need, but you just need the ability to offer some advice when it comes to high level management accounts or budgeting. So that's something that casework had to go through. So this is both a big plus side and a negative side of setting up a shared service centre. You need to structure it well. That it can be a huge positive. It allows you to be really, really flexible. And actually, if you just say, I need 4 hours of FD level work, it can be a really good platform to go and get that. But as has also been mentioned by Cara, there are definite downsides when it comes to that. So that people will say, oh, okay, I want this advice right this second. And if you're someone who has to at all time have the advice this second, a shared service centre is never going to be that sort of relationship, because there's always going to be a little bit of distance. No matter how well run you have your shared service centres, there's always going to be a little bit of distance between you and them. And we try and fix that as much as we can by having face-to-face meetings all the time. We go on site to our clients a lot to try and make that relationship feel more like it's an embedded finance system and not something utterly remote. But there's going to be an order in which you need to set up your reports. There needs to be an order in which you have to look at the work of your clients. So there are positives and downside, obviously. But one thing I would say is it has allowed us to set up across the network now an Age UK, and also spread beyond Age UK, the ability to provide finances to people who are across all different styles. And what's one of the big things we had to come across also, that was, if people are thinking about this, is it can be a little bit complex if you want to set up a shared service centre and make sure you don't have to charge VAT onto people as well. So again, I don't have time to go into a huge amount of detail, but I'm very happy if people have any interest in this, well, to pass on the legal advice we got and how we had to structure ourselves, because it is absolutely possible to structure yourself as a wage shared service centre for charities that you don't have to charge VAT on to all the clients, but you just need to be very careful of it. I could talk about this for hours, and I realise we're quite tight for time. So I won't go into too much more on that. But yeah, casework has been a story of evolution the whole way through. And the reason why it's working is we are constantly having to evolve and change the way we structure ourselves for our clients. But yeah.
Brilliant, Andrew. Thank you so much. So that certainly gives you a snapshot, but we've definitely got some time for questions and answers. Thank you to all of our speakers. That was brilliant. So I noted in the chat to say, if you've got questions, please can you put them in the Q&A, because it's much easier for me to track there because I get lost in the chat. So for that, Zoe, thank you very much for putting your questions both in the chat for us. And I'll take the first one for Valerie. I don't know if you've seen this, Valerie, but the question was, what was the size of the two charities? Do you think this makes a difference to how manageable the merger is? Are you okay to answer that?
Yeah, so size, if we're looking at a number of people, we had about 15 staff in both charities. So small charities, and we're looking at combined turnover 1.6 million. So and it wasn't really 50-50, but yeah, that's as a ballpark is the relative size of the two charities. So yeah, pretty small in terms of the depending on where you're coming from, I guess.
Do you think with that size it was easier for them to come together?
I guess I don't have experience of it in as bigger charities. I think the really challenging bit is the hearts and minds part, and I think from that perspective, small is really difficult because people have such, and I had people who had worked for the charity for 20 years. So they were coming into this very much aligned to their charity, their expectation of what it was about, what was at its core. And the thing is, at its core, both charities were trying to do the same things to support people with their tax issues. What's really interesting, I guess, is that despite which, because the two different business models, there was a lot of conviction among staff that their way was right. So that in a way, small was difficult because, and with staff who had been there for a very long time, because there was this sense that, but we're right, and you had to see and try and line people to a common purpose that you thought was there, but actually it was about realigning each charity, if you like, to its common purpose. And we did do that. I mean, there was sort of challenges of both charities. So we sort of worked on those two separate groups to just revisit the basic principles about why each charity are doing it. And it's like for one charity, wants to help everybody with everything. So it's like realigning us to what is the remit. For the other charity, it was like, well, we don't have enough resources to help anybody do anything. So it was saying, no, actually, there are purposes to provide this support. So it's like we had to align those hearts and minds to go on that journey. And I guess that could be regardless of size, but just small teams that have been working a long time, that was the challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Thank you so much, Valerie. Okay, I'm going to come to Stephen next with Zoe's next question, and then I'm going to come to all three of you on Amy's question about being led by teams, if you looked at that in the Q&A. So first of all, Stephen, Zoe's question was about, talked a lot about benefits and good collaborations. Can you tell us a bit more about the challenges or things that didn't work?
Well, I've answered that with a specific example. Certainly when my organisation started providing the transport to the local age UKs, there were quite a lot of difficulties. Some of that was to do with staff at the age UK who had been responsible for the transport when they had it in-house, thinking that the way they used to do it was the way it should always happen. So there was quite a bit of resistance about new ways of working, particularly with like rosters of where people were picked up from and what time, because we had planning software in terms of traffic movements and traffic traffic jams, those sorts of things, traffic levels within the day. So we could be much more efficient and not get drivers stuck. So people are turning up at the centre late, so they don't have as much time there. But we also had issues where our staff started to feed back and say, well, we've been asked to pick up this person at this house, and actually, we don't think they're in the right house because they're really struggling to get out of the door and up the path. So we were having to go back to the Age UK and say, well, look, we actually think this is a care issue. And they said, well, they've been coming quite happily, but some people we had to refuse eventually to take because we thought it actually wasn't in that individual's best interest to be, brought out of the house in the way that they were being brought out of the house. So there was a lot of friction, I would say. But certainly in my time, that didn't detonate the relationship. So there was quite a bit of rubbing up along the wrong way. And it would take normally myself as chief exec or the chief exec of the Age UK to sort of, talk to the staff, my transport lead and their team to say, look, we need to smooth this out, So, it probably took a bit more of my time than it might have done if there wasn't that sort of friction along the way.
That's brilliant. Thank you. Okay. Oh, sorry. There we go. I lost you for a minute. So I'm going to look at Amy's question now, which is to all of you, and whoever's ready can go first. Do you feel there is a value in ensuring that any collaborative working is led between teams in each organisation, or is it preferable to bring in a neutral person or similar to support complementary process mapping? So, Valerie, can I come to you first on that?
I think it was maybe a bit of everything. I think the benefit of bringing in somebody who is neutral is that it takes away that. I mean, the challenges that I was talking about people is it really means that somebody is providing that objective view. So I think that can be really useful because then within within bringing your staff or within teams or stepping everything forward, because stepping everything forward is just endless meetings, endless keeping everybody informed. The comms around merger is enormous, and if you don't get it right, it doesn't work. And also the nitty-gritty of just how does this work, and speaking to the people right on the front line. But I think having that element of neutrality takes some of all that latent anxiety and fear and alignment with some idea in individuals' heads because of the journey, their own personal journey. So I think there is a benefit in that, but it has got to work and be embedded at the same time in your own organization. That's a tricky balance to get right, maybe, but I think it takes both.
I concur with that, Valerie, definitely. Stephen, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it is beneficial. In my experience, certainly the more recent work I've been doing, myself and a colleague have been sort of the bridge, if you like, between those networks of local charities. And I think that can help everybody else around the table feel that they're equals. Because I think if you've got somebody in one of those organisations who's sort of leading the discussion, it can seem a bit imbalanced. And also, I think if you've got somebody as a neutral partner, it can also reduce those tensions between organisations of different sizes around the table as well.
Did you have anything to add to that?
I mean, I need to say I couldn't agree more with what someone just said. That whilst it's vital to make sure you are talking to both partners, and I'm always astonished when I go through these processes about how little sometimes senior managers understand of what goes on the shop floor, for want of a better term. So you do need to get to the point where you do understand the processes. Having it led by a neutral person, it's just easy, because, like I say, it's almost impossible otherwise for the other party to not feel it's being led by the other side, and then people are going to think that it's going to be coming from their side. It's not impossible, and sometimes people have no choice and they don't have the resources to go and do anything else. But if you've got the ability to have someone who is genuinely neutral and has no skin in the game, it tends to be better.
Great. Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to jump down to Eileen's question now, where she's asked, are there any known channels to offer shared services to other charities, or has the examples been given by the speakers all through personal networks? So I'm going to answer a little bit, and then I'm going to go to Stephen first to help me with that question. So in my experience, there are definitely pockets of activity, but it seems to be, do you know someone who knows someone? And one of the reasons why I wanted to run this webinar was really to share what was already out there, because it feels to me that there are different pockets of activity, but there's nothing specific that you can go to, although I think we're seeing more. But I'm going to go to Stephen first, obviously his experience, and then Valerie and Andrew, if you've got anything to add, if there's any other way that people can find out about shared services.
Well, my first piece of advice would be to always be horizon mapping, looking at other organisations in your space that you maybe need to be building relationships with. And throughout my career in charities, I've always done that, and I've run lots of projects in different charities, bringing up to 30 organisations together at times with shared interests. So I think you can't. If you're close to that, you're never going to get anywhere. But the Medway example I gave, I mean, that is an open SPV that certainly in Kent and Medway, organisations can pitch in and say, OK, we've got this offer. I think what they're trying to do at the moment is not have two offers of the same. So I think somebody asked a question about HR. So there is an HR offer, but that's being provided by one organisation, and they're trying to get a suite of offers within the SPV initially. So not having two or three people offering payroll through that, because otherwise you get into, well, which one is going to get that next piece of business? So I think it's it is an open vehicle within Kent, but yes, whether there's things like that happening elsewhere in the country, I'm not sure at the moment.
I've just been scrolling down the Q&A, and Mark Green from Canopy, if you want to have a look at what Mark says about what they're thinking. So Canopy is actually the building I'm in now, and this is a shared office space, and they've got over 50 charities here, and they're obviously thinking about it. But Mark, I'm sure you can see from this discussion that people are definitely interested in that. So that's definitely something to consider. Valerie, anything to add to that about where people can find out more shared services?
I think I'm going to say no, in that we were very much aligned in our purpose, knew of each other. So that was very much down to just local knowledge of the service we were delivering. Yeah, so you always think your own situation is unique. So from that perspective, that's maybe not a particularly helpful answer, but no, I don't think there's more I can add specifically.
Thank you, Valerie. Andrew?
I mean, obviously, Casework is a shared service provider. Okay, so if anyone is interested in anything sort of finance related or payroll related, we can offer advice on that kind of stuff. If anyone's interested, not just working, this is not a sales pitch, working with Casework, but if you're interested in setting up your own equivalent, I have no problem at all with some of the providing advice of, the good and bad we've gone through and learning from the things we did to get to that point. So if anyone's interested in creating their own one, I'm very happy to spend a bit of time with them discussing, what went well and what didn't. But yeah, HR comes up quite a bit and quite across the Age UK network. People are looking for that, but we haven't found a good one yet. Casework are maybe looking to move into that area, but it's not as easy as it sounds. It's taken a couple of years to make sure the finance works really, really well. So yeah, I'm not saying we won't move into HR, but yeah, we are looking ourselves to see if there's anyone who provides a really good platform. If we come across someone, I'm very happy again to share that.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Andrew. Stephen,
well, yeah, just looking at Mark's question, I think part of that is saying if there are commercial organisations that are interested in getting to the 50 or so organisations at Canopy, I think you've got to be careful there about not having tied deals that force people to use things. But I think if that's done in a fair way of saying, okay, this organisation is offering that sort of service, and if we could get 10 organisations buying into it, it could be at this price, then that's a fair thing to project. But you can't really I'm not saying suggesting it would, but to strong arm people who are in a space at the moment to use the same thing. I also, just a slight aside, another shout out I want to give in terms of sharing resources is the charity buying group. I don't know if anybody on the who's attending today has come across the Charities buying group, but that was set up about 30 years ago now by a chap called Mike Hodgetts, and that basically does do a little bit of what Mark's talking about in his question, actually saying, okay, if you're buying utilities, the Charities buying group can work with utility companies and have maybe 200 charities who say we want to buy gas. So then you can get actually a good sort of a bulk deal through gas providers. So that is an organisation I would encourage people to seek out and have a look at, and that's free to join as well, that organisation.
Excellent, thank you. We'll put that information in the slides. Thank you, Stephen. That's really helpful. So the next question I'm going to go to is Amy's about, and I think, Stephen, this is probably for you, but did you have to create more specific data sharing GDPR privacy policies when your agreements were informal, especially looking at the payroll?
Not specific to the payroll, but we did have a data sharing agreement with any organisation, any third-party organisation we work with. So we had a standard data sharing agreement, which we would have for payroll providers in the same way that we would for other charities that we might be doing collaborative projects with, working, for example, with housing associations, supporting some of their residents. So we'd have data sharing agreements with them. So yes, we would have something, but it doesn't have to be too onerous. There's a basic template you could really find around data sharing, the basics of that.
Excellent, thank you. And again, Stephen, sorry, I'm coming back to you, but the question about with your special purpose vehicle, how did you approach staffing when it came to the management of that in terms of setting up and mobilising the new venture? Were you managing out of existing resource or did you recruit?
It was entirely out of existing resources, so there was no. In fact, the Age UK's had somebody that they collectively employed strategically within Kent to support them. So we did get some of their time into the SPV, but the SPV didn't employ anybody directly. We did talk about that, about whether at some point we would have to have all the staff feeding up to it, but there was a feeling around the table that no, that's going to become too onerous in terms of the SPV. I mean, that was before the point that some of those member Age UK's merged. Obviously, once you've merged, you can do all that anyway through the merged organisation. So I think it was something that was of interest to members, but it was something that within that SPV structure was going to be far too onerous for us as trustees to manage the liabilities.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, there's a couple of questions I think here that I can probably answer. So, Helen, you've got at what point between informal agreement and full merger is it best to create one CEO position to oversee everything rather than retaining two? So, in Valerie's case, she just had the one, so it's harder for her to answer. Although, Valerie, if you want to say anything to this question, please do let me know. But I'll have a go first. I think it's always a really tricky one when it comes to that sort of merger position around CEO position. What often works is when one's already leaving or one's already decided. That makes it a lot easier and a lot easier to sort out. But what I would always say, if it's CEO and chairs that are having the initial conversation from informal to merger, is to agree those red lines at the beginning, because then it makes it a lot easier. And if it comes to the point where actually you've got both CEOs that want to say, you obviously then need to look at a fair and transparent process for recruitment. But I think most of the time it's having that conversation as early doors as possible, because then you know what the red lines are for each organisations. But that is definitely one of the challenges of that position. But Valerie, did you want to add anything to that?
I was wondering actually maybe whether to add a little bit to that and then pick up Zoe's question possibly on the prolonged
Sure, please do.
collaboration. You know, saying that the examples have been mostly prolonged collaboration ahead of merger, which yes was in my example. I think what I would say is specifically addressing Zoe's point on that and bringing in my own position on CEO is that if you had have asked me 7, 8, no, maybe 10 years ago when I started on the helpline at both charities, I would have said at that stage, I'd have thought, why aren't these merged? This should be one merged charity. What I recognized was that is not something, you know, that's maybe I could say that in a commercial environment, you sit down with a piece of paper and you might say, okay, this has to be a merger, and you work through it. I could see as I got to know the organization that I was recruited to initially that wasn't going to happen. That's like the confrontation approach. And so you then look at what is it that you're really trying to achieve. And so the length of time is more to do with actually, let's be focused on our purpose to achieve our purpose. If the purpose ultimately is best served by merger, it is not best served by creating disunity, creating conflict. It's best served by working it in such a way that you get to your end goal, if that's the best thing for the charity. But maybe it has to be done a different way than you would if you're just making a commercial decision. On the joint CEO, yes, Cara, as you say, there was a joint CEO, which was the one prior to my appointment. And that was because a CEO was retiring at one organisation, and really the two organisations had, as it were, that they financed the need to have a part-time CEO, and then there was one joint CEO of both organisations, and therefore my appointment at the stage that I was appointed was also as a joint CEO. So yeah, it has been a very long time coming. But the other thing is, it now gives us a chance to have one name, but actually in terms of the service and the delivery and the sharing of resources, we have now been doing that for 5 years. If we had have said merger at the start, I think the trustees would have fallen out and it wouldn't be happening now. So it's like we achieved what you really want to achieve by a merger through collaboration without the hurdle of a merger in its fullness. So in many ways, for me, this is like, okay, now finally we can sign off on the fact they're two merged and we've got one. But in terms of just delivering the services, that's what the merger achieved, was that cost saving, was all of those bits of being able to do things more effectively, efficiently, and sharing your resources, getting your expertise. We've been doing that now for 5 years. If we had have said merge 5 years ago, I think we would have two separate charities today. It wouldn't have happened. It would have driven them apart. So yeah, it's a different journey in this environment, I'd say, from my experience.
Thank you, Valerie. That's great. Okay, I'm going to do one more question to Stephen, which is about insurance premiums, if you know the answer to that one. And then for the final question, I'm going to ask all our speakers if there's one thing that you could have done differently before you engaged in any of this, what would it be? And then we will finish with that answer at 10:30. But Stephen, are you able to answer that insurance premiums question?
Well, only in the sense that I've never encountered that in the insurance policies that I've had in the organisation that I was running. But obviously, different insurers will have different terms in their policies. So yes, you've always got to look at that. But if you don't find find your current insurer isn't happy to, I'd say we'll talk to other insurance brokers and firms and explain what you want to do. Because certainly you can be insured to provide those things because you've got the professional technical expertise. You're doing them anyway for your own charity, so that shouldn't affect while you're doing it and outsourcing to other organisations if that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, I would definitely query that with your insurance provider and say why, because I'm curious as to what that clause is about. But yeah, I agree with Stephen, just look for another one, definitely. What I will do before we send the slides out is I'm going to do a little bit more research to see if I can find any other examples of back office support, particularly around HR and data, because I'm sure there will be some. So I'll do a little bit of research before we send the slides and I can add that in if I can find anything. So just to finish off, if I can just ask our speakers one final question around one thing that they would have done differently, and then we'll finish off. But yeah, can I go to Andrew first, please?
I mean, from my perspective, if I'd been involved literally on the ground floor when they set up, I'd have spent a bit more time in making sure we had a really good software setup to do it. I mean, I'm talking very much from a finance perspective here, and I know I'm going to be a bit biased when it comes to that, but having the right tool in place that allows you to be flexible, it was really important, and making sure that that provides what people need at the end. That's not relevant to everyone and everything we've talked about in this conversation, but when it comes to finance, getting that right software up front and making sure it was set up well and was flexible, that was crucial. That's what changed us from being very stuck in our ways and not being able to adapt to really being able to grow.
Excellent, thank you, Andrew. I'll come to Stephen next.
Well, if I answer that question in terms of the work I'm doing at the moment, trying to galvanise organisations to buy into the model that's in Kent, I think it's actually and I've talked to others about this, about really getting people to be set alight by the benefits, because I think otherwise the technical details about a shared purpose vehicle just put people off. But you can't get away from that once they've got the benefits and think, okay, I want to know more. But I think, as I said earlier, getting people who've actually been through that process to explain how it's worked for them, I think is something that people can empathise with better than something that's more theoretical. So getting more heft around lived experience of sharing services and emphasising the benefits, I think would probably have got things to a further point at this point than we have got.
Amazing, thank you. And Valerie?
I think my perspective is maybe don't underestimate the price you pay yourself, maybe, or working out how you're actually really going to sustain the enthusiasm and drive. You will get knocked and battered a lot of times in a lot of ways, and you have to be focused and determined to persevere. And I think to achieve that, it's easy. I find it easy to dismiss myself and my own needs. And actually that's a disadvantage, because you have got to sustain that. When your staff are just not feeling it, or where they're frustrated with something, or where there's endless change, you've got to still be convinced. And to do that, you need people around you who support you. You need a way of not just bringing enthusiasm for 6 months or a year. Let's be realistic about how long these processes take at such a fundamental thing as merger. It takes time, and you need the support to sustain the resilience through that.
I think that's an absolutely valuable point. I think it's the same for any collaboration and any partnership, because it's hearts and minds as well as practicalities, and you really have to invest in it. So thank you so much. Well, that just gives me an opportunity to thank all our speakers. Valerie, Stephen and Andrew for their time and expertise this morning. I hope you have found this session useful. As I say, we'll add some bit more to the slides and then we'll send that out to you. But if you have any questions or if you need any further information, please do contact me directly. And thank you all again and hope you have a lovely day.
Thanks. Bye.
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 Bye.